You know, there are wounds that don't bleed. They don't leave a mark you can show anyone. They live somewhere deep inside your chest, quiet and heavy, and they never really go away. I'm 67 years old now. My knees ache when it rains. My hearing isn't sharp the way it once was. But my memory, Lord, my memory is crystal clear. I can still feel the cold November air coming through the gap under the door of that little room they gave me. I can still hear the echo of his voice down the hall. Confident, dismissive, like I wasn't even worth slowing down for. This is the story I have carried alone for 2 years. And today, I'm ready to set it down. My name is Walter, and if you've ever loved someone more than yourself, only to feel like that love made you invisible to the people it created, then I think you'll understand every word I'm about to say. I had one child, a son, Marcus. Raised him alone after his mother, Diane, passed from cancer when Marcus was 11 years old. And I was 39, working as a high school shop teacher in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, not a wealthy man, not a man with connections or a fancy last name, but a man who showed up. Every single day, I showed up. I packed lunches. I attended every baseball game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference, and when Marcus needed new cleats for the spring season and my account was sitting at $42, I sold my grandfather's watch, the only thing of value I owned, so he wouldn't have to sit on the bench and feel lesser than the other boys. I tell you these things not for sympathy, neighbors. I tell you so you understand what I gave, and what I believed I had built. And Marcus grew up to be a sharp, driven young man. He graduated near the top of his class, earned a scholarship to a good university in Pennsylvania, and eventually built a career in pharmaceutical sales that took him places I could barely imagine. By the time he was 34, he was living in a 4,000-square-foot house in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, with his wife, Christine, and their 2 daughters, Lily and Rose. Christine was polished and beautiful. The first time Marcus brought her home, she admired my small house with the kind of smile you give a child's drawing, generous, patient, privately condescending. I noticed it, but I told myself I was being unfair. She was from a different world. That didn't make her a bad person. Marcus loved her. That was what mattered. And then came the invitation. Or rather, the arrangement. Not quite an invitation. 3 years ago, I took a bad fall, getting off the front porch. Broke my wrist, cracked 2 ribs, and scared my neighbor half to death when she found me sitting in the frost at 7 in the morning. Marcus flew in immediately, which touched my heart. But by the end of that visit, the conversation had shifted from, "How are you feeling, Dad?" to something closer to, "We need to talk about your situation." Christine was the one who said it most plainly. "Walter, you can't be alone out here anymore. We have the space. The girls would love having you closer." Said, "Come stay with us while you get back on your feet." She held my hand when she said it. She looked sincere. I believe she was, in that moment. People can mean things and still not understand what they're offering. So I packed 2 suitcases and a box of books, rented out my house to help cover my modest expenses, and drove 14 hours to Charlotte to begin what everyone agreed was a temporary arrangement. The room they gave me was a converted guest room at the back of the house. Nice enough, clean, a window that looked out onto the back fence and the neighbor's oak tree. I was grateful. I genuinely was. I kept my door tidy. I didn't complain. I offered to help with the girls whenever I could, and that was the part that saved me. Lily was 9. Rose was 6. Those 2 little girls became the reason I got out of bed in the mornings. Lily was serious and curious, always carrying a book too thick for her age. Rose was all energy and noise, the kind of child who laughs with her whole body. I read to them in the evenings. I helped Lily with her math homework. I taught Rose how to braid her own hair. They called me Grandpa Walt, and it was the best title I have ever held. And the best title, the best title, the best title, the best title. But the house, the rest of the house was a different story. Marcus was traveling 4 days out of every 7. Sales conferences, regional meetings, hospital visits. He was gone more than he was home. And Christine, though never outright cruel, had a way of making me feel like furniture, not hated. And 4. Just there, taking up space. When I offered to cook dinner, she said they had a meal service. When I offered to drive the girls to school, she said she preferred the routine not be disrupted. When I mentioned the faucet in the hallway bathroom was dripping, she thanked me and called a plumber without mentioning it again. I stopped offering after a while. I found my own rhythm. Coffee in the morning before anyone woke up. A walk around the block if my knees were cooperating. Reading in the afternoon. Time with the girls in the evening. I told myself this was fine, that this was enough. It was around February of that year when the headaches started getting bad. Not occasional headaches, persistent ones, behind my left eye, that left me squinting in the light and reaching for the wall when I stood up too fast. I mentioned it to Marcus on the phone. He said to see a doctor. I mentioned it to Christine once. At dinner, she said, "Oh, you should really get that looked at," and then turned back to her phone. I didn't have insurance good enough to cover a specialist visit without a copay. After my medications and my small personal expenses, I had about $60 left at the end of the month, sometimes less. My doctor referred me to a neurologist for an evaluation. The copay for that visit was $55. $55 I did not have. Now, I want you to understand what $55 means when you are 67 years old, living in someone else's house, trying very hard not to be a burden. It is not just money. It is the difference between asking for help and maintaining the last shred of dignity you have left. I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to cover it myself. I sold a few books online. I skipped my usual weekly call to my old friend Gerald back in Ohio so I wouldn't have to tell him how things were. And then one morning, Marcus was home between trips, which was rare. He was at the kitchen island, laptop open, coffee in hand, moving fast the way he always did when he was about to leave again. I came in quietly. I waited for a pause. "Marcus," I said, "I need to ask you something and I want you to know I've thought hard about asking." He looked up, not impatient exactly, but already somewhere else. "I have a neurology appointment next week. The copay is $55. I'm a little short this month. I was wondering if you could help with that." And I had the appointment card in my hand. I held it out so he could see it was real, so he would know this wasn't casual. He looked at it. He looked at me. And then he closed his laptop with a soft click. "Dad," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach drop before he even continued. "You know, Christine and I talked about this. We're covering your room and your food. That's a significant contribution every month. I can't just, where does it end? Today it's $55. Next week it's something else. I'm not in a position to be your personal ATM. I stood there holding that appointment card like it was evidence of something shameful. "It's a medical appointment, son," I said. Quiet, controlled. "My head has been hurting for 2 months. Then apply for a supplemental plan through the state. There are programs for this. I'll send you some links." iFan. He opened his laptop again. "I've got a call in 10 minutes, Dad. I'm sorry." He wasn't sorry. Or maybe he was, in some distant, self-preserving way. But he stood up, refilled his coffee, and walked down the hall to his office and closed the door. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not cry. I was past crying. I sat there for a long time, feeling something I couldn't name, something colder and quieter than anger. It was the feeling of watching a version of your son you raised disappear and be replaced by someone you didn't recognize, someone you maybe had never fully seen. He had the money. I knew that without question. End quote. 3 weeks before that conversation, I had seen a confirmation email on the kitchen counter. He'd left it there without thinking. A corporate sponsorship donation. Marcus's company, in his name as regional director, had pledged $120,000 to a Children's Hospital Foundation gala being held in April. $120,000. His name would be on a plaque. There would be photographs, a ceremony. The local Charlotte business magazine had already emailed to confirm they'd be covering the event. And he couldn't help his father make a $55 appointment about persistent headaches that were starting to scare me. I didn't confront him about it. I sat with it. I turned it over like a stone, looking at every side. And something inside me went very, very still. The neurology appointment came and went. I found the $55 by returning a jacket I'd bought at Goodwill and selling 2 more books. The scan showed nothing serious, just tension and pressure, likely from stress. The irony of that diagnosis was not lost on me. The gala was in April, a Saturday evening, the Charlotte Children's Healthcare Foundation annual benefit, black tie, the kind of event where the centerpieces cost more than my monthly food budget. Marcus had a table there. Christine had a new gown. The girls were staying with Christine's parents for the weekend. I wasn't invited. Of course, I wasn't. I didn't belong in that room any more than a rusted bicycle belongs in a showroom. But Lily knew I wasn't going. Lily, who was 9 years old and read books too thick for her age and noticed absolutely everything. 2 days before the gala, she came to my room after dinner and sat cross-legged on my floor the way she always did when she had something serious to say. "Grandpa Walt," she said, "is it true Dad wouldn't pay for your doctor?" I looked at her carefully. "Where did you hear that, sweetheart?" "I heard you and Dad talking. In the kitchen." She paused. "I wasn't eavesdropping. I came in to get a snack, and I stopped when I heard you say, medical appointment." I took a slow breath. "It was just a misunderstanding, Lilybug, grown-up stuff. Don't worry." She looked at me with those dark, serious eyes. She didn't say anything else that night, but she was thinking. I could see it. And that girl was always thinking. The gala was a Saturday. By 8 o'clock that evening, I was in my room reading, the house quiet. By 8:30, Lily should have been at her grandparents'. But Christine's mother had come down with something, and the arrangement had changed last minute. The girls were home. A babysitter was there, a college student named Dana who let them watch movies and eat popcorn. At the gala, Marcus was at the podium. I know this because it was live-streamed on the Foundation's website, and Dana had pulled it up on the living room television so the girls could see their father being celebrated. I came out of my room for a glass of water and stopped in the doorway. There was my son. Handsome in his tuxedo, confident at the microphone, he thanked the Foundation board. He thanked his colleagues. He spoke about the children the money would serve, about the importance of investing in the next generation, about how community was the foundation of everything that mattered. The room applauded. Christine, seated at the table below the stage, was radiant, glowing with the reflected light of his moment. "And tonight," Marcus said, his voice filling the ballroom, "on behalf of our regional team, I am proud to present a check for $120,000 to the Charlotte Children's Healthcare Foundation." The applause rose like a wave. He held up the ceremonial check. Cameras flashed. He was grinning the grin of a man who felt, fully and completely, like a good person. I stood in the doorway holding my glass of water. And then I heard Lily's voice from the couch. "Mom gives Dad a lot of credit for that," she said quietly. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to Rose, who didn't understand and was mostly interested in her popcorn. But he wouldn't even give Grandpa Walt $55 for the doctor for his headaches. Dana looked up from her phone. Rose looked at Lily. Nobody said anything. But the live stream chat was rolling on the side of the screen. And someone in that room, someone watching the Foundation stream, had a phone pointed at the television. I didn't know that yet. I found out later. The clip was 17 seconds long. It captured Marcus on screen holding the check, the applause still audible. And in the lower corner of the frame, Lily's voice, clear as a bell. He wouldn't even give Grandpa Walt $55 for the doctor for his headaches. Someone posted it in a Charlotte community Facebook group with the caption, "Overheard at the live stream watch party." Apparently, the man of the hour has a different policy for family. By Sunday morning, it had 40,000 views. By Sunday afternoon, it had been picked up by a local news aggregator. By Sunday evening, Marcus's phone was ringing with calls he wasn't answering, and Christine was in the kitchen with her jaw tight and her eyes sharp. Then, Marcus came to my room that night. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open and stood in the frame, and for a moment I didn't recognize him, not because of how he looked, but because of the energy coming off him. Frantic. Cornered. "Did you put her up to this?" he said. His voice was low and tight. "Did you tell Lily to say that?" I set my book down on the nightstand. I told Lily it was grown-up stuff and not to worry about it. Then how did she? He stopped. Ran his hand through his hair. Do you have any idea what this is doing? My name is all over social media right now. The foundation board is asking questions. My regional manager called me tonight. A. I heard, I said, because I had. Through the wall. I had. You need to go on record, he said. You need to say this is taken out of context. That it's a misunderstanding. That I offered to help and you refused. I looked at my son for a long time. This man I had sold my grandfather's watch for. This man I had made 100 lunches for at 5 in the morning when my back ached. This man who had a plaque with his name on it at a children's hospital and couldn't find $55 for his father's neurology copay. I won't do that, Marcus, I said, because it isn't true. He stared at me. Dad, you made a choice, I said. You make a lot of choices. This is just the first time one of them had a witness. Dax, and he left the room without another word. He slammed the door, which woke Rose, and I heard her crying down the hall, and Christine's voice going to her, shushing her, murmuring, and Marcus's voice somewhere in the mix, lower and harder. I sat in the dark for a while after that. Not with triumph, not with satisfaction, with something closer to grief, if I'm honest with you. Because there is no version of this story where I win something I wanted. What I wanted was a son who saw me, but that's all I ever wanted. The $55 was never about the money. It was about being seen, and. The story spread further than any of us expected. A columnist for a regional lifestyle blog wrote a piece about it, not using Marcus's name, but the details were specific enough that people connected them anyway. The comments under the Foundation's gala post on Instagram began to shift, not virally cruel, the kind of quiet, persistent questioning that is harder to weather than outright attacks. Does this foundation vet its major donors for character? Charity starts at home. My father was exactly like this. I recognized this. Exact. Marcus's regional manager, a man named Gary who I had met once at Christmas, called a formal review. Not a termination. Marcus was a high performer and the company wasn't going to sacrifice revenue over a viral clip, but a stern conversation about brand and personal responsibility, the kind of conversation that leaves a mark. Christine came to my room a week after the gala. She knocked this time. She sat in the small chair by the window. The first time she had ever sat in my room, I realized. She looked tired. She looked tired. Real tired, not perform tired. I didn't know, she said. About the appointment. About the $55. Marcus handles the finances. The Rust $5. I don't see every conversation he has. She paused. I'm not excusing him. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. And I believed her. I'm asking him to pay for your supplemental coverage going forward, she said. And I've already set up automatic coverage for your copays. It's done. She looked at the floor. I should have thought about it myself, long before now. I thanked her quietly. It was the most direct conversation she and I had ever had in 3 years of living under the same roof. Marcus apologized eventually. It took him another 3 weeks, 3 weeks of cooling news cycles and hard conversations with Christine, but he came to my room one Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me and said the words. They were careful words. Measured. The apology of a man who understood consequence more than remorse. But they were words, and I accepted them because holding on to anger at 67 is an expensive habit I can't afford. We are not what we were, my son and I. Maybe we never were what I thought. But we are trying. In the careful, imperfect way of people who have hurt each other and decided to stay at the table anyway. That counts for something. I choose to believe it counts for something. Lily never fully understood the scope of what happened. She was 9 years old and she said a true thing because the truth was simply sitting there and she had the kind of heart that doesn't know how to walk past it. I told her, gently, that what she said was brave and honest, and that I was proud of her. Rose asked if Grandpa Walt was going to the doctor now. I said, yes, sweetheart. Grandpa Walt is going to the doctor now. And here is what I want to say to you, friends, before I close this out. I have met men in my life who could write a check for $100,000 and feel genuinely virtuous about it, and those same men would look right through a person standing 5 feet in front of them because that person's need wasn't public enough to matter. Charity is easy when there's a camera and a ceremony and applause. Decency is harder. Decency is what you do when no one is watching. When it's inconvenient. Inconvenient. When it costs you nothing but a moment of attention and a sliver of humility. I don't need anyone to feel sorry for me. I am a man who raised a son, buried a wife, fixed 1,000 things with his hands that other men would have paid someone else to fix, and I have more strength in my quiet than most people find in their noise. I am fine, but I will tell you this, and I want you to carry it with you. The small cruelties are the ones that define us. Not the grand gestures. Not the plaques on the hospital walls. The moment someone who needed a small thing, a ride, a copay, 10 minutes of your time asked you for it, and you looked at them and decided they weren't worth the pause. That moment. That is the one that reveals you. My granddaughter didn't mean to pull back the curtain. She just couldn't find it in herself to pretend the curtain wasn't there. And honestly, neither could I.